You know, Mika dated at Dartmouth, a member of the Dartmouth Review.
Is that true?
For years.
Wow. Editor.
Wow.
Yeah, he was the editor.
Whatever happened with you two?
It didn't work out.
Ah, that is just really...
I think,
what are you asking on TV?
Laura Ingraham stole him. Or something like that. Am I getting that
Laura?
right? Yeah.
She would.
Just one guy.
Dinesh.
No,
I was left standing
Dinesh.
in the rain. It was not Dinesh. Yes, outside the Dartmouth Review, crying.
You know how many times I've heard this story so much.
On the
And I have a feeling that...
of the Review steps.
Oh, my God. It's just not true. She's making this up.
It was the driving rain in the middle of the winter in Hanover, New Hampshire. I took 2 buses to White River Junction.
Oh, my God. Why did I bring this up?
It's really stayed with you.
Can you
It's
imagine?
as though it's right here, right on the
Yeah.
tip.
It's almost like, you know, they said of George
spent
Harrison,
2
he could
hours
start
doing my hair
talking
and
about
makeup.
his past with the Beatles when he was happy with his present. Right?
Anyhow.
But apparently, Mika is still tortured by
But
her
the
past.
Review was so important. They were on deadline.
So
They had
she
important
must
news
not
to
be
do.
happy with her present. Today marks the 10th anniversary. I'm sorry you guys had to watch this. It's been 10 years since William F. Buckley, the conservative icon, passed away. With us now are 2 leaders of the National Review, the publication that Buckley famously founded.
Yeah.
You want to introduce them?
Jack Fowler joins us, Vice President and National Review Senior Editor Jay Nordlinger. Good to have you both on board.
So, tell us about Bill Buckley, and just first of all, your personal relationship with him, what he was like.
Great. Just great. And if you knew him in print or on television, you really knew him. He was like that. There are other parts, of course, but he was basically what you got in public. Hugely talented, dazzling, a real performer, funny, sharp, occasionally acerbic, big-hearted. You learn from him. He sort of lit you up, and we were seeing pictures. There's a picture there. Just the sight of him makes me smile.
You know, Jack, you would also do the sort of things that we did not see at CPAC this year. One of the complaints from conservatives was we should have conservatives debating each other on the future of the movement. But Bill Buckley did far more than that. He would find somebody that would, you know, he'd get Gore Vidal and or others and have these remarkable, heated at times, but remarkable debates. Or Norman Mailer, famous.
I'll say Gore Vidal is the one guy he didn't get. I think he was forced to talk with him. But outside of that, Bill loved to engage anybody, conservatives or liberals, to discuss and hone principles, to argue for the cause. And he understood that it wasn't in the discussion of principles that a conservative movement could and was formed.
And he wanted to be the opposite of what we're seeing with a lot of people right now. Jay, he did not want to preach to the choir, as we say in Southern Baptist churches. He wanted to convert people to his view. So he would debate Norman Mailer and others who disagreed with him.
He wanted to debate the best minds because he knew he was good at it. And he would probably come out on top. And there was rough and tumble and sharp elbows. You know, I sometimes say the show was called Firing Line for a reason. It wasn't all tea and crumpets. Sometimes it was gentle. But, yeah, he took on one and all. Very few refused him.
This morning, joining me now, Molly Ball, CNN political analyst, Sabrina Siddiqui, politics reporter for The Guardian, and Lynn Sweet, Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. Molly Ball, our Abby Phillip at the White House, had the quote of the morning. She said it's an all-caps morning here at the White House. Those are the all caps. Witch hunt, all caps, exclamation point. The question I have is why? I mean, why would the president wake up tweeting witch hunt this morning with everything else going on?
Because he thinks it's a witch hunt. I mean, look, it's not new that the president is obsessed with this investigation. He is obsessed with things that concern him personally. And so while matters of policy are perhaps of primary concern to people whose job it is to make policy on Capitol Hill and so on, and people like me whose job it is to cover policy, the president is preoccupied first and foremost with what he perceives as an existential threat in this in the investigation. And so that's what he's focused on. He's watching Fox News, he's tweeting about what he's hearing, and this is what he does.
With all caps, nonetheless. Look, you know, the United States, the American people are sort of using their own form of all caps and exclamation points in polling right now. You know, we asked in this new CNN poll, are you confident that the Trump administration is doing enough to prevent foreign influence in future elections? 60% say no. 60% say that the president, despite waking up talking about Russia, is not doing enough to prevent future influence. And one really fascinating point, 80% of Republicans, though, say that he is. Lynn Sweet, that's a staggering split.
And you have that divide, the partisan divide, in other parts of your new poll, too, which is very informative of the gap that exists in this nation when you talk about the perception of President Trump. You know, these elections are going to start rolling out in the weeks and months ahead when we have these primaries, Texas, Illinois, and so forth. So this isn't just now an abstract issue about election security in 2018. We're actually heading into the first polling. And the White House, the voting apparatus in different states have to convince people that the vote is going to be legitimate and it's not being infiltrated in any way. So that is a reason perhaps why you have this partisan divide, because President Trump has resisted this. Remember, just a few months ago he had a voting commission that he had to disband because he wasn't setting up something that was seen as bipartisan.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think back. It was only 2012, Sabrina. You know, Mitt Romney said that Russia was the greatest existential threat to the United States. He was mocked for it. So you go, though, from the standard bearer of the Republican Party in 2012 saying Russia is the greatest existential threat to 80% of Republicans in our poll saying, you know, they're not concerned at all about Russian meddling.
Well, absolutely, and that's part of why you've seen this president try and cast the entire investigation as a witch hunt, because it deflects from one of the core issues at hand, which is his own foreign policy toward Russia. Congress overwhelmingly passed on a bipartisan basis last year new sanctions against Russia, and the Trump administration moved last month to delay the implementation of those sanctions, which is something that has gone somewhat overlooked, as a lot of the scrutiny has instead been on the particulars of the special counsel's investigation into whether or not there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Moscow and whether or not the president obstructed justice. Now, that, of course, is still significant, but in many ways it's enabled the president to fixate more on the politics of the Russia investigation and not whether his administration is taking any serious measures to prevent foreign interference in the midterms and future elections, which it doesn't appear they've taken any concrete steps to do so.
So, Molly, if we can talk about guns for 1 second, because one of the very few concrete proposals that the president supported in the days after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, was, you know, raising the minimum age to buy a rifle from 18 to 21. And it was so notable because the NRA was against it. Nevertheless, the president said it again, and he tweeted it. But now it seems to have disappeared some. And our Jim Acosta is reporting that the president seems to be backing away. That's the sense that Republicans on Capitol Hill are getting right now. I know you've been skeptical from the beginning that Congress would take any action, Molly. Is this a sign, perhaps, of the imminent inaction?
Potentially. I mean, look, we just haven't seen this president able to exert focused and sustained leadership on the details of policy at any point in his presidency. It's not really his strong suit. And so, you know, you say concrete proposal. I mean, it was something he said, but it isn't something that the White House put in writing as a proposal. It isn't something that the president took to Congress and said, this is the thing that I want you to do and here's how. He's floating a lot of things, and to me, they're just trial balloons, and he's seeing what people like and people don't. He's hearing back what feedback he gets. In this case, potentially that feedback from the NRA saying we can handle some of the other things that you're talking about, even things that are somewhat in the territory of gun control, but we don't like this one. And so he is potentially trimming his sails. But the bottom line is Republicans in Congress are just sort of sitting on their hands until they figure out exactly what he does want them to do and what he's going to give them political cover for. And when he seemingly hasn't made up his mind, and the White House hasn't committed to anything, Republicans or Congress are definitely not wanting to go out on that limb for fear it's going to get sawed off behind them as it has before.
It's an interesting idea. Lynn Sweet, we're going to hear from the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, in just a few minutes right now. So you think he's going to come out, speak to cameras in this moment where everyone's saying, what are you going to do, Congress? And he's going to say, not sure yet?
I think that's what he will say. But the other thing to keep an eye out for, John, is whether or not President Trump decides to use executive actions to make some changes. President Obama did that because he couldn't get Congress to act, and we know that executive actions can be voided by the next president. So there is something that Trump could do if he wanted to. That's why the longer you wait until after one of these tragedies, the harder it is to keep this momentum going. The only difference here, I think, is that you have these students who have emerged as very articulate spokesman for the cause of doing something. And Trump now, this is one of the issues, because it is clear cut when he tweets the age is 21. I think it's easier for people to measure, will he do something on age or not? This is not a complex question, this one.
It'll be interesting to watch. We should note the president says he is going to use executive measures to ban bump stocks. That is something that the processes have begun. That also is concrete. We will see when that is completed. Sabrina, if I can, I'm going to switch gears now to Ivanka Trump, because yesterday we saw her in an interview. Remember, she was over in South Korea as an official representative of the United States. She flew over there on taxpayer dollars. She's a senior advisor to the president, whose last name happens to be Trump, and she didn't think she should answer questions about accusations against the president because she was the president's daughter. This morning, we're learning from CNN reporting that there's some dissent from inside the White House about the very fact that Ivanka Trump was sent on this very important trip to South Korea, given, I think, the sensitivities right now on the Korean Peninsula. Maybe John Kelly didn't want her to go, but he was told, hey, don't fight this fight, you're not going to win it. Do you think there is that level of tension inside the White House?
Well, I think that there has been some tension, certainly, that we're aware of between Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner and other factions within the White House who have been more skeptical of the role that they've played. But I think that there has been a blurring of the lines within this administration, where you have someone who is not just a senior advisor to the president, but also a member of his family, taking very high-profile positions. You know, we recall in one of the foreign trips she sat in the president's seat. That was another move that drew criticism. And I don't think that in the scheme of the news cycle and many of the issues that at any given hour we're talking about, these little nuances get the same attention that they would had this been any other administration. But I think that more importantly, in this critical moment on the Korean Peninsula, I think there are many people who would, of course, argue that there should have been a representative from the administration who had more influence in foreign policy, particularly at a time when there are escalating tensions and you don't know what could transpire during that visit.
All right, Sabrina, Molly, Lynn, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
The United States top diplomat in charge of North Korea says he is out. This was a surprise retirement. What does it mean as the U.S. that the president has struck a deal with Boeing to order some new jets that will serve as the new Air Force One? 2 jets, to be clear. He wants them ready by 2021. That's a little bit earlier than had been previously determined before. Now, one key here is the price. The White House says that this will be a deal for $3.9 billion. You remember some time ago, as the president was coming into office, he tweeted, he complained that Boeing wanted the deal to be for $4 billion. The president thought $4 billion was too much for the Air Force One jets. He negotiated them all the way down to $4 billion, essentially $3.9 billion. I should note now, though, that the White House says that the original estimate was more than $5 billion. So they say, the White House does, they're saving more than $1 billion. They want the jets by 2021. We'll have more on that. In the meantime, a huge shakeup at the State Department as one of the nation's top diplomats suddenly calling it quits. Joseph Yoon, the key figure in charge of North Korea policy, retiring at the end of this week, very quickly. Our senior international correspondent, Ivan Watson, joins us now with the very latest. Ivan, what have you learned on this?
Well, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, he has reluctantly accepted this resignation coming from Joseph Yoon, the man who was the special representative since 2016 on North Korea. Now, Yoon tells CNN that this retirement is completely his own decision. A lot of his colleagues are saying this is a big loss to the State Department because Yoon is a more than 30-year veteran of the U.S. Foreign Service with a lot of experience here in East Asia. He had that delicate and ultimately tragic assignment last year of traveling to Pyongyang to try to retrieve the imprisoned American university student Otto Warmbier, only to then learn that he was basically dying of brain damage in a coma. And so some of the former State Department officials that we've talked to are saying this is a setback because now diplomacy is more important than ever here in Korea after a year of missile launches and nuclear tests, personal insults hurled by the North Korean leader, by President Trump, and now North Korea indicating that the doors are open to talking to the U.S. And recall, there are a lot of diplomatic posts still vacant right now, including the U.S. ambassadorship here in Seoul, still empty. John?
Ivan Watson for us in Seoul, South Korea. Ivan, thanks very, very much. For the first time since the mass shooting there, the challenges they face being acutely felt by survivors of another shooting just months ago. 58 people killed in Las Vegas. Now the survivors of that massacre are telling the Parkland students, we have your backs. CNN's Sarah Seidner has their story. Sarah.
John, yeah, these survivors were brought back to their most terrible place after seeing what happened in Parkland. But they do want to let the Parkland students know that, indeed, they will heal, but it will be a very long road.
My cheek was shattered. So my scar is my eyebrow, and then it goes over a little bit further.
When you see somebody get shot in the head, you want to get involved.
There was no life left in this boy that was with me.
Gunfire altered all of their lives during the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. Nearly 5 months later, the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, brought their terror right back.
I had an automatic reaction. I couldn't control it. I went into the bathroom. I started vomiting. I was on the floor in a fetal position for 2 hours.
They know what these children are going through and the long road to recovery. Mother of two Chelsea Romo still has many surgeries to get through after shrapnel tore through both of her eyes, initially blinding her.
I thought about, as my daughter grew up, and not seeing her get married or seeing her become a woman and seeing her face as she matures, like, oh, it's crossed my mind. And that's why now I thank God every day.
She is now laser focused on simply seeing her children grow. Survivors Heather Goose and Christine Carria are helping other survivors while nursing psychological wounds. Goose spent hours holding bullet-riddled strangers as their lives slipped away.
He got shot in the back of the head, so I reached under and I was holding a jeans jacket to the back of his head. The jacket had dropped and my finger was in the bullet hole in the back of his head.
Paige Melanson was hit in the elbow, her mother shot in the chest. She's still in the hospital, awaiting her 10th surgery. These survivors agree America's leaders have not done enough to tackle a uniquely American problem.
I mean, after the Las Vegas shooting, they said it's not the right time to talk about guns. After the Texas shooting, they said it's not the right time to talk about guns. After Parkland, oh, let them grieve. It's not the time. When is going to be the time?
We all don't want to see babies die. We don't want to go to a concert or a church and feel like we're going to get killed. We can do better than this as a nation.
Carria, a mother of two, is convinced a ban on semi-automatic assault-style weapons and bump stocks is a good start. Her conviction so strong, she became the president of the Las Vegas chapter of the Brady campaign against gun violence.
I'm very pro-Second Amendment. I love guns.
Heather Goose never thought new gun legislation was needed until being covered in the blood of strangers. Do you have a problem with AR-15 assault-style rifles?
Yeah, I have a problem with a killing machine.
Do you have a problem with bump stocks?
100%.
And why is it hard for you to say we need to ban AR assault-style weapon?
If people hear us say we want to get rid of one certain type of gun, all they hear is, you want to take my guns away.
Are you trying to take their guns away?
No.
No.
100% no. But is this a killing machine? Yes. Is it being used to commit mass murder? Yes. You know what? We need to start somewhere.
But not all of the victims of the Vegas mass shooting believe that new gun legislation is the answer. Heather Goose knows that all too well. She says she's lost some friends over her new stance on guns. She's also been trolled quite strongly online, and it's really hurt her as she tries to heal from the psychological wounds that day. John.
Sarah Seidner, thanks so much. What important yet what painful insight to have. All right, we're just moments away from two big events on Capitol Hill. First, White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, no aide closer to the president over the last 2 years. She will testify before the House Intelligence Committee. We're getting word they expect her to answer every question, really. Plus, House Speaker Paul Ryan about to address reporters. What will Congress do, if anything, to make gun safety a paramount issue? We're following it all very closely. who does virtually no communicating in public at least, is set to appear in private before the House Intelligence Committee. There is no aide closer to the president or who has been around him more since the beginning of his campaign. Also, House Speaker Paul Ryan set to answer questions any moment. He will be pressed on what Congress will do, if anything at all, in the wake of the school massacre in Parkland, Florida. Much more on that in just a moment. But first, a moment in the Russia investigation that might explain why the president is shouting this morning, virtually at least. Look at those words he posted just a short time ago. Witch hunt, seen as Manu Raju on Capitol Hill with the very latest. Hope Hicks, has she arrived yet, Manu? I think Manu's having a hard time hearing me. Manu, you hearing me?
Any minute now, John, we are expecting Hope Hicks to walk into the House Intelligence Committee meeting room just below me. The question is whether she's going to answer questions about her time during the transition period and in the White House. What we can tell you is that Congressman Mike Conway, he's the Republican who's leading the Russia investigation, just told our colleague Jeremy Herb that he expects her to answer all those questions during the transition and during the White House. The question is whether or not she will actually do that, or whether or not she will do what Steve Bannon did when he appeared before the committee earlier this month, when he said that he would not answer questions because to preserve the right of the president to invoke executive privilege both during the transition and during the campaign. What Hope Hicks does today is uncertain. Whether she has an agreement with the committee, also uncertain. Mike Conway is saying he's not aware of any agreement that she has reached to limit her testimony. Other Republican members, too, want her to answer more questions, John, including Tom Rooney, the Florida Republican who's a senior member of the House Intelligence Committee, just said to me, I do, when I asked him, does he want her to answer questions during the transition and during the campaign, during her time at the White House. So the question is, will she actually answer those queries when members do pose them to her in just a matter of moments? There's expectation that she will limit her testimony based on what Steve Bannon did and based on Corey Lewandowski, who separately would not answer questions about his time after he left the campaign in June 2016. And that is the Democrats have demanded a subpoena for Lewandowski to answer questions. They've also demanded Steve Bannon to be held in contempt. What will they do if Hope Hicks doesn't answer questions? All going to be answered just in a matter of moments here, John.
All right. Expectations are one thing. Reality is another. We will have to wait and see whether Hope Hicks does what past aides have done and refuse to answer questions on the presidency, the transition. Manu Raju up on Capitol Hill, thanks very much. I want to go straight to the White House right now, where the president has been using his executive time to vent out loud and in all caps on the Russia investigation. Abby Phillips at the White House this morning. Good morning, Abby.
Well, good morning, John. The president has ended his relatively lengthy silence on Twitter with more tweeting about Russia. He's been tweeting all morning with some older quotes from Fox News appearances over the course of the weekend. That's what's so interesting about this. The president isn't watching this morning necessarily. He's tweeting things from all the way back on Sunday. One from Ken Starr that was on Fox and Friends, and another from Jonathan Turley praising his comments on Fox on Saturday night. So it all is full circle here. He ends it all with that last all caps witch hunt tweet, which is a common refrain for this president and might very well be linked to the fact that Hope Hicks, one of his closest aides and someone who's been around the president for a long time, is testifying before the House Intelligence Committee this morning. You know, President Trump has a busy day ahead of him with meetings, but for those precious hours in the morning, his time is all his, and he's used it to once again weigh in on this Russia investigation, hammering home the point that he thinks that this investigation is all a hoax. No word yet today from the president about the other burgeoning issue at the White House, which is guns and what to do about gun violence. I think we're probably going to hear more from him on some other topics today, but for now we know what's on his mind, and it's Russia once again, John.
Abby Phillip, we know what's on his mind. Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Abby. We're also waiting, as we said, for House Speaker Paul Ryan. He will answer questions about what Congress will do or not do this morning in terms of possible gun control measures. While we're waiting for the Speaker, our Sullivan Serfati up on Capitol Hill to give us a sense of what might be going on up there. Sunland.
Yeah, John, certainly this morning there have been a bunch of key closed-door meetings, members of the House Democrats, House Republicans huddling behind closed doors, and we likely will, emerging from those meetings, learn potentially what the next steps to all this, if anything, will be on Capitol Hill. Of course, we have heard from President Trump, who's been pretty vocal in the last few days, and certainly since the Parkland shooting, that he wants to see some action on Capitol Hill. But keep in mind, it is the Republican leaders in the House and Senate who will be the ultimate people and those responsible for putting legislation on the floor. So they have a key role in this. And that's why what we hear from Republican leaders up here today, the first full working day for the Congress since the Parkland shooting, what they say so important to determine the next steps. We will be waiting for Republican leaders, including House Speaker Paul Ryan, come to the microphones and brief reporters in the next few minutes where we potentially will hear a path forward. And the House Speaker's office in recent days had made it clear that as of now, he is going to wait to see what the Senate does to take the next step. So certainly that's likely something that we'll hear him repeat today when he's pressed by reporters, and later today we'll hear from the Senate leadership. Certainly lawmakers are facing considerable pressure, and adding into the mix the fact that you have the Stoneman Douglas students up here on Capitol Hill. They huddled with House Democrats this morning. We'll meet with individual lawmakers today, so it certainly adds into the considerable pressure, John, that they are facing.
Sunlen Serfati on Capitol Hill. We will watch very closely, expecting to hear again from the House Speaker any minute. In the meantime, joining me, Ron Brownstein, CNN senior political analyst, and CNN commentators Bakari Sellers and Alice Stewart. Alice, you know, it was interesting. Sunlen reporting Paul Ryan says he's going to wait to see what the Senate does on guns. The Senate saying, hey, wait a second, we're kind of waiting to hear what the president wants on guns. Everyone looking at everyone else. Who's leading on this, Alice?
I would like to think that the president will lead on this. He's made it quite clear what he wants on this, and there's a virtually universal consensus with regard to strengthening background checks.
Alice, I think you're right. Most of the time on most things, he hasn't made it clear on this, because on the single issue of raising the minimum age to buy a rifle up to 21, you know, he said it, then he stopped saying it, so we don't know where he stands on that. And in terms of background checks, he's never actually made clear what he wants to strengthen, has he?
He's made it clear he wants to strengthen the process and make sure that the proper information is put into the system. But he is clear also on a few things. Certainly banning bump stocks, he's made that quite clear. Hardening schools, no more gun-free school zones, which are a welcome mat for those that are looking to go commit violence. And also he is a big proponent of arming certain teachers and those on campus that want to have a firearm, that are adept at firearms and who are well trained, and that's something that he is quite clear on. And the NRA also, you know, so many people are pointing the finger at them stopping some type of measure. They're very strong on making sure that people that should not have guns, that are a harm to themselves or others, they are the ones that shouldn't have guns. And this is about making sure that we keep all guns out of the hands of some people, not some certain guns out of the hands of all law-abiding citizens.
So, Bakari, some Democrats have suggested that they may be hesitant to support this fix NICS thing, to give incentives for states to report to the National Criminal Background Checks, because it does not go far enough. Do Democrats, though, do you think they need to get on board with measures that go anywhere and not hope for the moon on this? And warning, I interrupted Alice, so I owe you an interruption, and I'll do it at any time.
Yeah, I'm figuring that the interruption is coming anyway. But you know, I say that Democrats have to seize this moment. Not often do we get a moment in time where the public perception is right where we need to be to create the change we want to see. I think that there's simple things that we can do. I think that not only can we have universal background checks, but I also think that we can study gun violence at the CDC like the public health crisis that it is. I think that we can close the person-to-person loophole cell, and I also think that we can ban bump stocks and close the Charleston loophole. I think that those are bipartisan efforts. As for who's going to lead this, if in fact after Sandy Hook, the United States Congress, and you have 20+ kids who were murdered and gunned down in their own elementary school, if the United States Congress doesn't do anything then, I'm sorry to say, but I don't have much faith they're going to do anything now. I have more faith in the young people who are leading this movement, the public putting pressure on our members of Congress, than I do on the President of the United States, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell.
I'm going to interrupt you only at the very end, because I want you guys all to hold for a minute. And Ron Brownstein, I want you to talk about young people in just a moment, because you have a fascinating take on this. But joining me now, and he has to run, so we're getting to him right now, is Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana. Senator, thank you very much for being with us right now. I'm glad you jumped in right at this part of our discussion because we were talking about this measure before the Senate that at least the number 2 in the Senate, John Cornyn, wants to bring up, which is, to fix, it's called the Fix Nix Plan, to address some changes to improve the national criminal background check on buying guns. You have actually opposed these changes over the last couple months. Why?
I support the spirit of Senator Cornyn's bill.
But the spirit isn't the legislation.
I just don't think it's going to do anything. I mean, this is what it says. It says, look, we know for a fact that many federal agencies and many states are not sending information into the NICS database. There are holes in the program you can drive a Mack truck through. So in order to encourage compliance, we're going to tell the federal employees, if you don't start doing your job, we're going to take away your bonuses. Well, why the hell are they getting bonuses to begin with? To the states, it says, pretty please, if you'll do your job, we might give you more money. We'll give you a leg up on getting grants. That's not going to accomplish.
Walking away from a new gun law that would have made it harder for the killer to get a weapon. Also today, new CNN reporting on the growing number of warnings missed. Twice as many calls to the sheriff's office as the sheriff actually says. But we begin with big testimony in the Russia investigation. One of the president's closest aides in the innermost ring of the inner circle, Hope Hicks, will appear before Congress. Who knows if that was the impetus for the president to wake up shouting on the Russia probes. Look at that. All caps and an exclamation point. Let's go to CNN's Manu, all caps, Raju, exclamation point on Capitol Hill to preview this big Intelligence Committee hearing. Manu.
Yeah, the big question, John, is whether or not Hope Hicks is actually going to answer the committee's questions. The Democrats in particular want to ask her not just about topics that happened during the campaign, but topics that happened during the transition period and happened while she was at the White House and as she's become communications director at the White House. Now, what we've seen from the last 2 high-profile witnesses who have come through this door is that those witnesses have not answered the committee's questions, particularly Corey Lewandowski, who during his January testimony said that he was not prepared to answer questions about any matters after he left the Trump campaign in June of 2016. Now, Democrats had called for a subpoena of Corey Lewandowski to answer some questions about those topics. Republicans have not agreed. But on Steve Bannon's case, when he came before this committee, he did not answer questions about the transition period and his time at the White House, saying that the White House had instructed him to invoke executive privilege to protect those communications that may have occurred with the president. That assertion of executive privilege by Bannon had been scoffed at by Republicans and Democrats, with some threats to hold him in contempt of Congress. Now, the question today is whether or not Hope Hicks will do the same, whether or not she will answer questions about the transition, whether or not she will answer questions during her time at the White House, and if she does not, will the Republicans join the Democrats in expressing their concerns, either threatening to hold her in contempt or issuing her a subpoena? We don't have those answers yet, but we will know in just a matter of minutes when she arrives here behind closed doors, when members tried to ask her questions. And remember, John, her first appearance before the committee, which was scheduled for January, was delayed amid all these questions about exactly what she was willing to answer, including the Trump Tower meeting, what she knew about the Trump Tower meeting with Donald Trump Jr., and the response to that meeting, which we know was misleading, and that she apparently had a role in drafting that statement to the news media. All questions that a number of these members want her to answer. The question, though, John, will she answer? We just don't know that quite yet, John.
An unusually stealthy Adam Schiff walked behind you moments ago, Manu. We're going to let you get back to your job stalking these members, see if we can make some news before the hearing begins. Check back in with us if you hunt someone down. Thanks, Manu. Let's go to the White House now, where it appears that the president has been catching up on some missed TV from over the weekend, sharing some of his favorite views on the Russia investigation. Seriously, that's what he's been doing. CNN's Abby Phillip at the White House with that. Abby.
It's been an all-caps morning here, John, for the president, who's in the White House on apparently executive time. What's interesting about these tweets is that after a nearly 3-day hiatus, the president is back on Twitter. He's talking about the Russia probe, and he's tweeting some old quotes from Fox and Friends appearances over the weekend. At least 2 of the quotes came from Sunday morning, one from Ken Starr, the other from Jonathan Turley, both of them talking about Hillary Clinton and the Russia investigation, all driving toward a central point that the president punctuated in his final tweet, which were 2 simple words: witch hunt in all caps and an exclamation point. The president is clearly focused on this Russia story, despite the fact that the White House often talks about the media and Democrats being fixated on this issue. We know, based on the president's own comments on social media, that he woke up first thing in the morning and that's what he was tweeting about. There are a lot of other things on the agenda today, John, for the president, including this brewing issue of guns, but we still haven't heard much about him, about that today from him. And it remains to be seen if he's going to advance that issue or if he's going to continue to be fixated on Russia, especially as today one of his closest aides, a longtime aide, Hope Hicks, is testifying. That might be something that is bothering him as he goes into this day, John.
I suppose it depends on how much he is caught up on the DVR this morning. Abby Phillip at the White House, thanks so much. Joining me now, CNN contributor, professor at the University of Texas School of Law, Steve Vladeck. Let's talk about Hope Hicks appearing before the House Intelligence Committee meeting this morning, Steve, because in some ways this could be like a Seinfeld hearing, a hearing about nothing if she declines to answer questions about her time in the White House, which seems almost definite, and her time during the transition, which seems highly likely, correct?
I think that's right, John, and I think it's worth stressing that those are actually very different legal questions about whether Hope Hicks can avoid answering those questions. There's no such thing as executive privilege during a transition. The president-elect is not protected by Article 2 of the Constitution. So I think it's actually a very weak claim if Hope Hicks says she can't talk about the transition. As for once President Trump came to office, the harder question, John, is have some of these privilege claims been waived, given how much the president and those around him have actually talked publicly about these very conversations and about Hope Hicks's role therein?
And there's no privilege, zero privilege during a campaign. And obviously Hope Hicks was at the president's side for the duration of the campaign. Correct, Steve?
That's exactly right. And I think one of the real interesting points here is a witness can show up and refuse to answer a question. By itself, that's not a problem. The question is what happens then? Is the majority, in this case the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, your friend and mine, Devin Nunes, actually going to push back and require Hope Hicks to formally assert a privilege, even potentially one that doesn't exist? Or is the committee just going to allow her to not answer questions, much like they did with Steve Bannon, throw up their hands and walk away? That's the really interesting thing to look for. Is the committee going to try to force the issue, especially for questions about the campaign and the transition, when there's really no legitimate claim to executive privilege?
Steve, I think a question that a lot of Americans have right now is what's the point of having congressional investigations right now, particularly the House Intelligence Committee, if they're not going to push for certain answers, given that Robert Mueller is doing his own investigation and has already heard from Hope Hicks?
Well, I think it's important to separate the different roles of the Robert Mueller investigation on the one hand and Congress on the other. What Robert Mueller is investigating is basically a counterintelligence problem, which is Russian interference in the U.S. elections, and then there have been criminal indictments arising out of that counterintelligence investigation. Congress, John, has a broader mandate. Congress can look into anything it thinks is relevant to the American people. Ultimately, if Congress thinks there's real malfeasance here on the part of the president and his administration, it's Congress, much more than I think Robert Mueller, that's going to be the one we want to hold the administration accountable. And John, at the end of the day, Congress is the one that can make the political considerations, the political evaluations. That's not what Bob Mueller is supposed to be doing.
Now, thank you for explaining it like that, because I think that's lost on some people. They play very different roles, and by not answering questions to Congress, which has a clearly defined role here, you are in some ways, thumbing your nose at the system. Let me put up a number which gets to, I think, the larger issue here. CNN has this new poll out which finds that 6 in 10 Americans say that President Trump is not taking the investigation into Russian efforts to meddle into the election seriously enough. 58% not taking it seriously enough. And that is what is at the basis of this entire investigation, and that is what Robert Mueller, just 2 weeks ago, he charged 13 Russians for meddling in the U.S. election.
That's right, John. I mean, I think it's worth stressing. We have 19 indictments and 5 guilty pleas out of what the president labeled this morning a witch hunt. It doesn't sound like a witch hunt to me. Now, there's a separate question about whether at the end of the day, Robert Mueller is going to find any evidence that the president himself or those closest to him were directly involved. But, John, leaving that aside, there is the broader and I think increasingly indisputable fact that the Russians did indeed attempt to interfere in the 2016 elections. And I think the most telling thing about the president's tweet storm is that absolutely none of it has been about how the government, how the United States should respond to that interference going forward to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Professor Vladeck, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
So in the immediate wake of the Florida school massacre, the one concrete measure the president suggested he would support was raising the minimum age to buy a rifle to 21. He said it again and again and again. Listen.
We're going to go very strong into age. That's age of purchase. We're going to work on getting the age up to 21 instead of 18.
Perhaps we'll do something on age, because it doesn't seem to make sense that you have to wait till you're 21 years old to get a pistol, but to get a gun like this maniac used in the school, you get that at 18.
But after having lunch with NRA leaders over the weekend, the president suddenly gone quiet on this issue. A White House official says it's not clear where the president currently stands, and a congressional source tells our Jim Acosta the president seems to be backing away. We will have to watch that very closely. In the meantime, House Republicans are to face the cameras next hour while the Senate struggles to move a bill on background checks that most senators seem to support. Still, not much movement on it yet. CNN's Suzanne Melvo on Capitol Hill. Suzanne, what's the very latest?
Hey, good morning, John. Well, in less than an hour, we're going to hear from House Speaker Paul Ryan, that press conference. He is going to be pressed on that very issue, whether or not they're even willing to bring a bill before the floor. There seems very little appetite, honestly, John, among lawmakers here, and little enthusiasm to do so. We're also going to see Senate GOP folks after their policy luncheon, what they come up with, whether or not there's going to be a big push. Here are some of the proposals already that are on the table. The bump stocks issue. That was something that came up after the Las Vegas massacre. Folks thought that that would actually go through. Something would be done to ban, if you will, that little device that turns a semi-automatic to an automatic weapon. The president has indicated perhaps he'll take some sort of executive action or order on that. Improving a federal background check system. That was something Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia, had pushed back in 2013. It also failed. It would require an expanded check, if you will, for gun sales and gun purchases over the internet. He wants to reintroduce that. We'll see where that goes. Changing the legal age, as you had mentioned, to buy a long gun or a rifle from 18 to 21. That is something that initially the president said, yes, he'd be up for. It seems to be backing away from that. Also restricting the size of the gun magazines. This is something Senator Marco Rubio talked about right after the Florida shooting. At least in the town hall, the CNN town hall seemed to adjusting his stance, acknowledging that perhaps less deaths would occur if you didn't have that capacity for as many rounds to be shot. We'll see where that goes. And finally, the ban on the purchase of AR-15 style weapons. That is something that we heard from Representative Brian Mast, very powerful Republican who made his case. He is a vet. He says this is cannot be in the hands of just anybody. There are 164 Democrats who are co-sponsoring that bill. It seems to have a lot of support on the Democratic side, on the House side. But honestly, John, it does not look like it is really going anywhere. And so there are lots of ideas, real big questions as to whether or not.
Bring out the bold.
There's a new place for senior care, a place with 24-hour valet service and upholstery classes. A place where seniors get the care they need in the comfort of home. Home Instead Senior Care.
This morning, teachers and staff are back at work at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Tomorrow, students will go back to class 2 weeks after the shooting that killed 17 people. Now we are learning still more about missed warning signs on the shooter. The sheriff says he got 23 calls about him and his family, but CNN pulled the records, and they show the Broward County Sheriff's Office got at least 45 calls on the shooter or his brother since 2008. And at least one of those calls came from the shooter's neighbor, who says she begged an officer for help.
He basically told me that there was nothing he could do unless he carried out a threat, unless something happened.
In this case, unless he shot a school, because that's
Yes,
what you were talking
basically,
about.
yes. And after he left, I just felt completely helpless and frustrated. I didn't know where else to turn.
The neighbor says she and her husband both knew they would one day see the teen on the news. She said, quote, in an orange jumpsuit being charged with murder. New developments on this story from Georgia now. Delta Airlines, the largest employer, private employer in that state, decided to stop providing a discount to NRA members to fly to the annual NRA convention. Now some Georgia Republicans are retaliating.
I'm tired of conservatives being kicked around on our values, and it's time that we stand up and fight and show corporations that conservative values are important.
Republicans there vowing to block a tax break that would have saved Delta more than $40 million. Joining me now, Republican State Senator Michael Williams. Senator, thanks so much for being with us. Just so our viewers know, you are running for governor. Let me stipulate that. And you actually opposed this tax break for the airlines even before the Delta move, correct?
That's exactly right. On Friday, when Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle was trying to fast-track this bill through the process, I actually stood up and objected to a procedural move that would allow the bill to come to a vote beforehand.
Okay, but I should say, the Delta move upset you even more. Why?
Well, the Delta move brought more attention to this. So really, it's kind of helped me to get people aware of what's going on so that we can energize our base, to energize those people here in Georgia that love our Second Amendment, that love our Constitution. They've gotten involved. They've sent out text messages, Twitter, emails. The people in Georgia, again, those people that love our Second Amendment are infuriated by this, and we're able to use this to advance the discussion about how we don't need to give corporate welfare.
Delta says it likes the Second Amendment. Let me read you their statement. It says, Delta's decision reflects the airline's neutral status in the current national debate over gun control amid recent school... Hang on, let me read this, and I think we have a graphic we can actually put up to go along with it. Out of respect for our customers, employees on both sides, Delta has taken this action to refrain from entering this debate and focus on its business. Delta continues to support the Second Amendment. So, you know, it's not like they're levying a surcharge on NRA members. They're just pulling back a discount.
Yeah, but again, that statement is completely false. It's a straight-up lie. By doing this at the time they did, by saying that we are no longer going to give the Second Amendment, the NRA members, this discount, they threw themselves.
They're saying the NRA members. Just to be clear, they're saying the NRA members.
Correct,
There's no Second Amendment members. America are Second Amendment members.
Why didn't they pull the discount for those that support Planned Parenthood or some of the issues on the left? Again, they've injected themselves into this argument.
But that's not. Look, Delta, to be fair to Delta, a year ago when there was that play in Central Park, in the Shakespeare in the Park, where someone who looked like President Trump was knifed in this bloody manner, they pulled funding for that show.
Yeah,
so
when they behead our president. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Who's not going to pull their funding for somebody who wants to behead our president?
So let me put it this way. There are other businesses in the state of Georgia, correct?
Yes.
That do not give NRA members discounts. Do you feel they should be penalized?
No, again, we're not penalizing, and my stance is not to penalize Delta for taking away the NRA. My stance has always been that we do not need to give out corporate welfare. Delta makes billions of dollars a year. They don't need this tax break. And on top of that, they're trying to attach this tax break to the bill that's going to allow the Trump tax break to flow to the people of Georgia. So Delta's kind of hijacked this whole debate.
Well, there are two separate issues, and again, you absolutely oppose this even without the Delta NRA issue, but you opposed it even more strongly, which I think is a fair statement, after Delta made the statement about the NRA.
It's been able to energize our base and get them involved in this discussion.
Is it fair, though? I mean, Delta is the largest private employer in your state. You think, again, on this narrow issue on the Delta NRA spat, that it's worthwhile to penalize the largest private employer in your state?
I am not penalizing Delta for their position. They injected themselves by taking away that discount in our NRA members. They did it the same weekend that the Senate was talking about giving them a tax break. In fact,
is
we had
providing
a
a discount, is singling out NRA members, though, is singling NRA members out for a discount. Would that not be, weighing in on this discussion right now?
No, exactly. That's what they did. They interjected themselves into this debate. And by doing so, it's brought a lot more attention to what I am trying to do, which is to stop corporate welfare. That's the underlying issue for me. Again, Delta is making billions of dollars. Why do they need a tax break from the citizens of Georgia? Plus, again, attaching it to the bill that's going to allow the Trump tax breaks to funnel down to the people of Georgia. I just think the whole thing is wrong. And the fact that Casey Cagle, Lieutenant Governor, wants to come out and said he's against it now only after they whipped the senators to see if they would stop him from pushing through this tax break.
All right, Georgia State Senator Michael Williams. Senator, thanks so much for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, we're just moments away now from the opening bell on Wall Street. Starks set to open a little bit lower this morning. Investigators waiting to see Jerome Powell make his first trip to Capitol Hill as